All right, the last section we're going to look at in Chapter 4 should be a review. It might go a little more in depth on some things that we've already covered in class, though. And these are the chemical components or compounds in cells. So first thing we need to know is what a compound is. In order to know what a compound is, we need to know what elements are. Elements are any substance that cannot be broken down into a simpler substance. We have a whole table of these, boom, that I'm pretty sure you have at least seen. I don't know how familiar you are with it. But each one of these makes up a different element, all 118 that we know right now. So elements, your examples are hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, again, anything on that table, are going to be made up of atoms. Elements are only made up of one type of atom. So if I have the element carbon, then that's just a whole bunch of carbon atoms. There is no other atom in there such as nitrogen. Again, here is your periodic table. You should be familiar with at least some of them, but we'll look at this a little bit more next year. Compounds are when two or more of these elements decide to combine chemically. Now there is a chemical reaction that takes place in order for these two combined. So it's not me just putting one next to another and being like, hey, now I got a compound. A compound, they do need to be chemically combined and bonded together. The smallest of these compounds, the small unit we call molecules. So examples of compounds that you're probably familiar with is carbon dioxide, water, which is H2O, and sodium chloride, which is table salt. Those are all compounds. So if I take more than a couple of those elements, bond them together chemically, I get a compound. You have two types of compounds. We have organic and inorganic. Organic compounds are simply any compound that's going to contain the element carbon. Carbon is your building block of life, and it is your most abundant element on our planet. Not to be confused with the universe, which would be hydrogen. So carbon most abundant on the planet, universe most abundant is hydrogen. Inorganic compounds are going to be compounds that do not contain carbon. So for example, an organic compound would be CO2. Note the C stands for carbon. There's carbon in there, it's organic. An inorganic compound, such as water, H2O, does not have carbon in it, and therefore it's classified as inorganic. Pretty simple distinction there. Our living things are going to be made up of 5 different compounds. For the most part, these are going to be organic, but again, you do see water down there, so water is inorganic, but it does make up all living things have these 5 chemicals, and we looked at that in Chapter 1 as well. So let's talk about them. First is carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are your sugars and your starches. So again, anything that ends in OUS, sucrose, dextrose, glucose, all of those are sugars. They are produced through photosynthesis in autotrophs, and they will combine to form different types of sugars. Your basic sugar, for example, is glucose. So I got a glucose molecule right here, and I can combine that with a fructose molecule, which is another sugar, and I can get sucrose, which is even another sugar. So that OSE ending there. Sucrose. Sugars are going to combine even further to form starches, and these are your foods like potatoes and other vegetables and stuff like that. Pastas will work as well. And they are used to produce energy in the cell. So you burn these. If you have a diet that's heavy in carbs, then you probably burn a lot of carbohydrates, or you're very active. You burn these to produce their energy. Next up is lipids. Lipids are a little better at storing energy than carbohydrates. Lipids store energy for longer periods of time, and they do contain more. These are your fats, oils, and waxes. You are probably familiar with the idea of saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Just a little diagram here will show you that these are kind of a long chain molecule, and it just kind of repeats itself over and over and over again. But those are lipids, so think of fats, oils, and waxes. Next are proteins. Proteins are large organic compounds that are made up of smaller organic molecules called amino acids. Again, proteins are going to be formed in your ribosomes. You can think of your hair as a protein. It's made up of a whole bunch of amino acids, and it makes one long molecule called a protein. There are only really 20 common amino acids that make up all proteins. You can think of this kind of like the alphabet. In our alphabet, we only have 26 letters. Well, our cells only have 20 different amino acids to make up all the proteins that we see in our world. Well, you can think of how many different words we can make with 26 letters. So our possibilities are pretty endless here, especially because of how proteins can repeat and go on for excuse me, longer strands than just smaller things. So you're going to get a lot of protein from your meats, eggs, fishes, nuts, and beans. Our next one, which is very important for our future discussion on genetics and heredity, which is nucleic acids. These are your genetic materials. They are going to be found in your chromatid inside your nucleus if you are DNA or deoxyribonucleic acid. It is important to know the name of that. Or your RNA, which is your ribonucleic acid, and it's important to know the name of that one as well. These are your genetic materials. These contain your instructions to carry out any functions that your cell needs to do. We will get a lot more in-depth into this, but it's really just a phosphate backbone with a nitrogen base and a sugar attached to it. Our last chemical compound in living things is water. Water is used for many different things. Not only do we break it apart to use the hydrogen oxygen out of it for different processes, it also helps dissolve other chemicals, so we can break apart those chemicals or compounds and use them. It helps us transport materials throughout our cells from one cell to the next. It also helps keep cells their size and shape. So as opposed to animal cells who don't have a cell wall to help give it some support and structure there, water can help that as well. Hopefully that was mostly a review on that video, and that is going to conclude our notes for chapter 4.